I know what you're thinking. This is total clickbait, right? But no, it's real. Let me tell you how Microsoft Orleans can basically save small to medium teams from the misery of a microservices infrastructure. Microsoft Orleans allows you to build scalable, fast, resilient and distributed backends without microservices and all the craft and hassle that comes with those. No Docker or Kubernetes required. If you were going the microservices route, you would have something maybe like a user service, which would be its own application, its own executable, run with its own Docker container, its own Swagger endpoints, its own deployment artifacts, its own monitoring setup, and everything else. This user service would then provide an API for other services to call upon it to access CRUD and other operations on the user domain object of your, say, domain-driven design. Then thinking you are onto something, you might then build completely separate applications for other objects in your domain, ending up with an event service, a post service, a subscription service, a billing service, and so on, each an individual application. You then might try to share code between the projects, thinking you are building an internal framework library or something. You'd then have NuGet packages that you'd share between them, and then because this is private code, you'd end up building an internal NuGet package feed. And at just this early point, unless you have 20 plus developers on your team split into sub-teams managing each microservice, you're well on your way to becoming well out of your depth. In the future, when you're then managing 200 microservices with the same small team because you're not allowed to hire 200 developers, you might start thinking, what if there was a better way of doing this? So for organizations that are not Netflix, they're not Google, or they're not a neobank like Monzo Bank with hundreds of microservices and hundreds of developers, there is a better way. With the Microsoft Orleans actor model, you would then instead represent users as instances of the user grain. There can be any number of instances alive of a user instantiated in the system. Each grain is referenced by a primary key, for example, a user ID. You could imagine each instance of a grain as an NPC in a video game loaded in and out of memory as necessary. So this user grain itself is just a very simple C# class with a C# interface that defines a contract. So instead of having to manage Swagger docs to define interface contracts between types of objects, you just have a C# interface. It's magic. This user grain could be in the same deployed solution and share server resources with other types of grains. You don't need any extra boilerplates surrounding every different type of grain, like OpenAPI docs and Docker files and so on. So let's go through some of the benefits of this pattern and how, where traditionally you might want to use microservices to get these benefits, you can now get them with Microsoft Orleans. So caching. The grain storage pattern keeps a copy of hot data in memory all the time so that you don't need a separate data caching layer. So you can literally, essentially, unless you use Redis itself for somewhat persistent grain storage, you can throw your caching layer in the bin. You don't need it. You just use your application's memory for caching. So for scalability, grains are by default spread over all of the available silos or servers in your cluster, and this can be configured any way you would like, so you can pin certain grains to certain servers if required. You don't need to do anything here, no Kubernetes or Helm charts at all, it just works by magic out of the box. And it's all testable. So since grains are just interfaces, you can write unit tests that would test logic across multiple grains. You don't have to create mock web services. Your test harness doesn't need to spin up other instances of other applications to test against. You just write your usual, not mock obviously, but your end substitute mocking code against the grains that you want to test against. So those of you at this point ready to get your dollar symbol out on your keyboard and type insults against Microsoft, $M, hilarious. Even Google have built basically the same thing for the Go language. This is called Service Weaver Framework. A modular monolith is what they're going for here. Even they have seen the light. Check it out. So why is this shift important? Well, in a world where money isn't cheap, development shops have up until now had two options to build large, scalable systems. They either had to find unicorn developers that were both actually very good software engineers and are proficient in, understand and can deploy the classic Docker Kubernetes DevOps stack. This equals money. They're expensive. Alternatively, they could build a completely separate ops team that cannot and won't write the actual software. They just handle the infrastructure. Again, big money. Microservices are complex and Microsoft is fully aware of this. Their corporate customers who actually pay them money will be asking them why microservices software now takes a minimum of twice the amount of staff to build and run that the monolith that they used to build in the N-tier app days took. You will notice quite a few recent design decisions in the .NET world have come from finally realizing this fact. Minimal APIs were a response to having too much boilerplate in each microservice. The dream here was that you could reduce an entire application down into basically a single file. Well, a single file is basically like an Orleans grain, isn't it? They also added automatic Docker containers in Visual Studio. So MS Build will just create your Docker file for you because they found it harder and harder to train people to do this. So why should you look at Orleans? Well, unlike some of the other stuff that has been coming out of the Microsoft development world recently, it is actually good. Now, I'm going to compare it to something. Let's briefly compare Microsoft Orleans to, say, .NET MAUI, which is a bit of a travesty. Since they got rid of the OG Xamarin team, they basically destroyed it, and it's becoming the new Silverlight, is my opinion. One key difference is that it is Microsoft Orleans rather than .NET Orleans. It's .NET MAUI, it's not Microsoft MAUI. They also actually use Microsoft Orleans in their core products themselves. This is possibly the key difference. I challenge you to name one major Microsoft product that uses .NET MAUI. Please, just write it in the comments and put me out of my misery. A major one that's important to Microsoft, please. So Orleans is used on Xbox Live, and it's used in Microsoft Azure, and it's used in quite a lot of their core products that generate most of their revenue. That's important. The last reason you should look at Microsoft Orleans is because of the team behind it. There is this developer Giga Chad called Ruben Bond, who is a senior developer, and he is basically a walking genius. If you look at the Orleans Discord, which is really, really active and good and healthy, he is fielding questions from people all day, and big respect to you, Ruben. You're a legend. And they've also brought in Brady Gaster, who is a familiar name in the .NET world, to oversee this from, I suppose, a management point of view. And he is also, well, kind of pretty much everything he touches turns to gold as well. So Ruben and Brady, thank you for essentially saving .NET with Microsoft Orleans. After all of that and criticising .NET MAUI, I'm never ever going to make Microsoft MVP. But if you would like some more videos about Microsoft Orleans, for example, on this channel, maybe some actual code, that would be good. Please like, subscribe, that sort of thing, and maybe even leave a comment if you're feeling generous. Thanks for watching. Cheers.